right, so let's go ahead and get started, and then as people come, we'll just let them in. So a little bit of logistics for today's session. We're gonna kind of do this as a little bit more informally. Sharon's going to, once she starts presenting, as she goes through each part of her presentation, she'll stop and ask for questions from anyone along the way. Feel free at that point to raise your hand or unmute and ask your question. And then if you would prefer to use the chat to type your question in, you can do that as well. And I'll monitor those, and we'll pause at different points and ask and answer those as well, instead of saving everything for the end. And the two other things. So once I turn and I'm going to introduce Sharon, and then I turn it over to her, you're going to want to go up to your view, which is in the upper right corner, and change it to speaker view once that happens. So you'll be able to see Sharon and then her presentation instead of seeing everyone in the gallery. Okay, so Sharon Plant is an educator with over 25 years teaching experience. She currently serves as the Chief Technology Integrator at the Southport School. She uses her structured literacy training and understanding of technology to empower students with learning disabilities in the classroom and through virtual learning. Sharon has taken the work done at the Southport School and conducts presentations and workshops, providing educators this training, incorporating best practices in professional development. And we're so fortunate to have her with us this morning. So thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, absolutely. I'm excited. So I thank everyone for being here on a beautiful Saturday morning here at we're in the middle of summer, and to learn about this and hopefully take this a little further. What I hope to do is kind of give you some snippets, share my screen, of some of the things as I was telling them ahead of time. At the Southport School, we are a structured literacy based school. We have an Orton Gillingham Fellow on staff who I have worked directly with over the last several years. Her name is Teresa Collins. When she came to us, she came from the Kildonan School, and I was already in the midst of doing some of the technology, and it was a shift for her to say, how to go one-to-one to small group. And many of you having been in public school before, prior to Southport School, I know, no one's doing one-to-one. We're small group instruction as well. And hopefully this is increasing more in some of the public schools. So the idea is just to share some tools throughout some different parts of the structured literacy lesson that could be really translated to whatever structured literacy program is out there, but even some tools that could just be small bits and pieces that I think can make a difference. What I love about these is most of them are pretty commonplace. So you would hope they would not be so odd to put into really any classroom. I mean, that's always my big thing when I try to talk to educators. I would love to hear the regular educators hear some of this and realize it's not such a challenge. But also those of you who are knee deep in this, and particularly in the public school setting, may be able to find some of these to be a benefit for various purposes. So it's kind of just a snippet, bits and pieces. And please do feel free to either unmute, ask along the way, put it in the chat box. Let me move my chat box so that if something comes up, I would hate for you to wait till the end and then forget it. So again, I am the Chief Technology Integrator, which I always tell people as they hear this, I'm actually a special education teacher. That is my master's in special education. I just happen to appreciate technology. It supported my own learning challenges. And seeing the difference that it makes with educational assistive technology, it just is a great combining of two periods of interest that has just become this great thing to support our learners at our school and hopefully share with all of you. If you're on Twitter, I'd love to connect through there. If you have not visited our school's website, love for you to take a look. We are a small little campus in the heart of Southport, a block from the harbor. And then a couple of years ago, we started this CoLab, which is really the training branch of our organization. Dr. Ben Powers, our headmaster, really, had this vision along with actually Teresa and I already started doing it, how we could bring more people together, similar to what you guys are doing, to share information. And to that actually point, something new we just launched recently. We just had a couple of workshops on the last couple of weeks, and we've decided to put them out there for on demand if you want access to them. for a small fee. They are available, and we're hoping to be put more of these. The comprehension and writing, actually, Teresa and I did together. They were about 3-hour workshops for going through some of the structured literacy components and then following up with technology. And then Jeff Ruggiero, our director of education, and I did some on executive functions. Those were each about an hour and a half. The second part has the technology at the end, but also some games that can be done at home and in class. So just so you guys are aware, that's a new component to our website, just actually literally launched yesterday. So for structured literacy instructors, this is the thing that I think has become a big challenge. We, for so long, and I thank you to, in our states, we were mentioning earlier, Allison Quirion for the legislation that has happened in Connecticut. She's really made a big difference in how that happens. Of course, we need to get that into practice. We know there's the demand for structured literacy, also some misunderstanding. I don't know if any of you caught some of the Haskins Laboratory Summer Series, which was trying to bring a lot of that research to practice model, some great people on there sharing information. And then how do we make this scalable to the classroom, easy for educators? Because if it's too challenging, I know for anything, technology or not, that's when our teachers shy away. And why incorporate technology? I still look back at these pictures and laugh. The left-hand upper picture was actually Teresa's classroom for a time period. She had flashcards upon flashcards upon flashcards. Totally get it. I had flashcards. I had books that I tried flipping with them. I had multiple resources. And fine when you're planning a one-to-one session, but I was finding when I was working with small group, I couldn't have my flashcards in the right order, or I would drop them and then they'd be all out of order of what I needed. So that kind of led to some of that. How can I make some of these print things accessible? How can I make it easier for students to do things at the same time so there was no downtime? And you have each student being unique, and how can you make it more multisensory if you're working in that technology area? So that's really what kind of led me to thinking about how can we do this? I do this across multiple areas, but really was big for us in that structured literacy instruction. So we know what that instruction looks like. We talk about all these components that really make up structured literacy instruction. You can think about, again, I'm Morton Gillingham trained, but I've also been Wilson trained. And then there's letters, and there's all those great programs out there, but they all have these same components that they work on these same components of structured literacy for our students. And most of them out there follow some sort of idea of this lesson. So I'm kind of try to align it to some of these areas where, how do we start with those visual and auditory drills to reading, to a bit of spelling, and then how do you get some connected reading in there as well? Because no matter what program you're doing, they all have elements of this that are key parts of a structured literacy lesson. So if I go to kind of the early steps of structured literacy and the phonological awareness, there are some really specific tools. Some of them I'll show examples of. Sound Literacy is an iOS app designed by a speech language pathologist. And what I akin it to when I was Wilson trained back into my first year of teaching, one of the things I loved was the magnetic boards that you can move the tiles around. Challenge I ran into a couple of times was, of course, losing the tiles. And that was one problem, that I needed more of one tile than another. And that was one problem. So I'm going to give you a kind of glimpse of this app. I have a screenshot of it in just a second, but this was a great tool for that. Meyerson OG Deck is, again, an iOS app. It looks like flashcards. What I love, it makes me think of the Linda Moon Bell Lips program a little bit. So it has the picture of, the letter, it has sound, it has pure sound. So that's always key, I think, in my phonological awareness training, and that, has to be good sound. But they also have a funny little video of someone's lips making the sound, which can be really beneficial for some kids. And we have relied on Lexia for years. We had it long ago when they were early on to now, and I've loved all the iterations. Definitely a reinforcement tool, not an instruction tool, but their Core 5 and their new revamped Power Up for middle school on up. Really great things being done in there that is for great reinforcement. But even in just that lesson that I want to use, what else can I use? You can go back to something as simple as Google Slides to make for sound cards. We actually had one teacher, we used the Gestalt Ellis for assessment, and he had a student who really struggled when saw the whole list of words, he put them each on a slide and the student would go through them very seamlessly. And I found it very beneficial when we were in virtual learning, because again, I could just hit, next, and the next word would come up and go through. Keynote, PowerPoint, same idea. You can do them in there. We have a very favorite tool, Class Kick, that I will reference many times today. It's really a blank whiteboard style tool, but some great things in it. And then there's another iOS app, Word Wizard, I'll address in just a second. So this is a quick shot of sound literacy. In non-COVID times, this would just have to be on the teacher's iPad. This is not an app I give to students. It would be on the teacher's iPad. And actually you can have it set up for more than one student. At the top, you see it says student 1. Over on the left, if you hit the waffle, you would be able to adjust if you had certain settings in it for other students. So it could just be on just one license. I can't think of the cost at the moment. It kept going up and down, but you can, again, only need one, and it was not giving to students. There is no sounds in here. So again, it's just like those magnetic tiles that I was talking about. They can be dragged down to the bottom to have the student, sound out words. Again, it follows that premise of that the vowels are in one color, the consonants are another. You can even go back to just block where it says blanks and symbols, just cute color cubes. I think when I early started and had Unifix cubes, and that's how we worked on those sound components. But you can see that this really can go all the way up to suffixes, basics, prefixes, really high level morphology tools, all within one tool. So that's what I really love about it. She has a great Facebook page, lots of great examples of how you can take this even further. That I'd be happy to connect you to, or if you can find her on Facebook. It's really a really beneficial tool. It can be projected as well. Of course, it'd have to be touching the iPad to be moving it, although we're moving into the idea of how to use a stylus so kids aren't touching teachers' iPads who have this. Word Wizard, also again, iOS app. What I love about this could be on a student's device. It has a movable alphabet, so very similar to what I was talking about with structured, the sound literacy, but this does have sound associated with it, and they're pretty pure sounds. They're pretty good for what they are. What I love with the movable alphabet, I had students when I was working with some younger ones, and again, I would think of this more elementary age, or maybe lower middle school, definitely not higher. But I could give them maybe their spelling list, and they could use the movable alphabet. And as they move each letter, it makes the sound of the letter. So if we're a cat, it would go k, as they move the C, a, and then t, and then it says the whole word. So this could be independent practice with some headphones in the classroom, could be a station, could be go at home, practice, that they could do this and use those sounds to do some independent work and get that reinforcement without me having to be direct sitting with them. You can put in some more things in the spelling quizzes and things like that, but it does have to be done on each student's individual device to do that. But can be a lot of fun if you're working with just a small subset of students. Something that actually is funny, this just actually came my way like this morning. And I know some of my teachers have been doing this year. These poppets are huge. I don't know if you have kids who have made this their new thing. I love them better than fidget spinners, by goodness sakes. But there's been some great things coming out across different parts of social media on using these for word dictation. We just actually bought them, gave them to all our summer school students to use, and we'll be doing them for our kids this coming year. Yes, they're great fidgets, but that idea that you could have them, pop as they do the sounds and then do whatever activity. This video would have showed, that they were saying the sounds as they pop each letter and then writing them down. Talking about when we talk again, multi-sensory, these can be great. If you're working virtually, the student could have this at home. You could see what they were doing on paper in virtual time periods. I love it. Ooh, with the letters on each bump. Oh, I need to find that, Sarah. That's kind of cool. But here's something that I think, I think of, yes, it's kind of low tech, but if you were still working virtually for some reason, or again, you needed something that was a reinforcement, these talk about taking something that was just out there and doing some really cool things with it. So we moving to kind of a bit more decoding. Again, I'm going to mention Class Kick a little bit along the way. A couple times I'll mention Jamboard. Jamboard, again, a blank whiteboard style tool from Google. Again, how can you incorporate something as simple as slides, Keynote, PowerPoint? And then If you needed a little bit more structure to some things, or maybe some activities built in, there's tools out there like Nearpod and Pear Deck that can work with something like Google Slides to make it a bit more interactive. So these boxes were actually Teresa, when she started working with our small group instruction, she was struggling with how these kids knew which words to read. So on paper, she would create a table in Google Doc. This is Google Doc table. Then she would color code the boxes, because that way the kids knew what colors they had to read. They were assigned a specific color. And then she would actually print them out on paper, give them to them to read. Said, let's first of all, why don't you project it so that the kids can see it, or it can be on their own devices so you're not dealing with all the paper. So the idea of color coding, first of all, was that you could differentiate within a skill, and it would not be so dreadfully obvious to the students who might be having, maybe it's simpler vocabulary, maybe it's 2-syllable words versus multisyllabic words. And I will tell you, I did this with middle schoolers and they really had no idea. They did not focus on it because they really only wanted to read their subset of words, and that was it. So this was easy to project. It could be on their devices. You could do it on paper. And we would do this, and the numbers on the side being the tool that it's in, with sentences would be color coded and paragraphs would be color coded. So also when students were doing independent practice before they read out loud, they would just focus on their color. To take this a step further, I would pull these into, for this purpose, into the table into Google Slides, so that it was just also a great place to manage keeping it. It could be Docs or Slides, again, or if you're in a different, again, Apple or Microsoft platform. But by pulling it into this tool, Nearpod is kind of an overarching tool that can take multiple kinds of content and activities and build it into kind of one lesson. There is a free level and then there is a paid level to them. They actually have a lot of content already pre-made. But for also working in small group, particularly right now, we found virtually last spring, we have been fully in person since September, but of course we had to have 6 feet, and you throw in somebody with ADHD on a device and we know where that can go. So within Nearpod, you can, on my device, as you can see on the right, I would see, okay, how many students are signed in. I could see exactly who's signed in, and it remains green until someone leaves that app. So if I have that student who wants to swipe over and think I don't know where they're going to, it turns red. I can click and see who it is and give a nice gentle reminder to be back on task. So nice structure to control, while also providing this differentiated reading instruction. And additionally, with this happen to be working on ED, within Nearpod, there's, as I said, other activities. There's actually, they have a new fun game-based one that's a similar to me, like a Kahoot, Gimkit, quizzes idea, but just basic multiple choice questions. So I could add in another part of that activity right within the same tool, that they could practice some other parts of the lesson that I may want them to do. They do have a drawing component as well. So you could really build a whole lesson within one tool. And I think that's one big thing takeaway we've learned somewhat in person, but really virtual, was that we have to try to maintain within simple use of tools, not a lot of tools at once, because it's hard for kids who struggle with attention and executive function, that they can't shift very easily. So if I can build multiple things into one tool, that just makes it so much easier to keep them on task and them focused. So as I mentioned, ClassKick is one of our big favorites. So taking the same concept of those color-coded ideas, this ClassKick would just begin with a blank whiteboard style screen. The student and the teacher all have the same tools at the top. So they have the ability to draw, they have the ability to highlight, they have the ability to do a text box. They can record audio. What I also like about ClassKick is when you design a lesson within it, the students cannot do anything to your work on your page. When I do something in Google Slides and I try to share it out, they still have the ability, unless you create it as the master, they can move things around, edit, delete. They can't do that. They can't touch any of your work. So here, again, thinking of multisensory, or again, I have a small group instruction and I can't sit and listen to everybody at once because they can't maintain, on task behavior unless I'm sitting right with them. I can have everybody doing it this one, just get some headphones with a microphone or off in a corner and they can record themselves reading on their own. I recorded myself giving these directions as well. So if a student could not decode my directions, I can provide an audio component. And this also, again, they can go work independently on their own. If they have that one who loves to do more, they can go read others' lists. Nobody seems to need to know. You can build multiple slides within here. You can add in multiple choice questions, fill in the blank. You can actually now build in it's been a while, manipulative. So maybe it's a dragging activity within here for different decoding. Maybe you're having them, drag something on, by sound component. So much to do with in there. And then I mentioned, and I'm going to go a little bit more about ClassKick, show you a little bit more as I get into spelling a little bit. But another tool, again, I mentioned was Pear Deck. Pear Deck is a Google add-on, so it only would be working within Google Slides, but it does add the ability, again, for either a live lesson, again, the teacher sees who is on, you see what a student is doing if you're in their paid version. So you would have, I would have my iPad and I can see what the students are doing, and then I'm projecting to the screen if they need to see it, but it does also show on the student's device directly, so it can be virtual. So you can add in drawing slides. There is the ability for them to type. There's, again, a dot they can drag. You can't have manipulatives be dragging, but they also have some other great slides for engagement through other areas. It's definitely worth exploring the free version a bit, and I'll talk about some other resources. I use this a bit more in writing. I think I might talk about that a little bit, but it's another great tool that's out there that has, one, the teacher in control, or again, it can be asynchronous. The student can be moving at their own pace. Both, again, Nearpod and Pear Deck are great components for feedback, as would be ClassKick. Just another option that's out there that we have found that helps build a lesson in one place, but provide opportunity for different types of engagement without switching a lot of tools. I love, of course, my students will do anything if it's a game. So again, Kahoot fans, quizzes tends to be my favorite. Gimkit, I know some people love, although I haven't jumped on it because there is a cost to that one versus the other ones. One of the great things I love about quizzes over Kahoot, you need to you have to project it. The students have to be able to look at the screen, decode what's going on, process what's going on, remember it, and then touch their own device. So that can be a challenge for a lot of our students who cannot do that far point. And you got working memory, you got processing speed, and then you got decoding and comprehension abilities falling in there. With quizzes, you can have it set, well, it's automatically set that the question and all the responses appear on the student's device. You actually don't need to project anything. When I project it, it's actually just showing a bar of how the whole class is doing in competition. But the students can also choose to have the things on the screen read to them. So I don't need to be running around, hey, I can't read this. Can you read this to me? And then they lost out on time, and then they lost points, and then they're frustrated. All of that going on. This can read directly to them as makes sense for the activity. For some activities, I try to have students not turn that on, but it's just a great feature for something that does not require them to have to decode. I'm just looking for them to understand concepts. And again, anything in a game, they will love to jump up on. All right, before I jump into encoding and morphology, and I haven't seen any questions in there, but if anyone has a question related to any of those tools, feel free to either jump on or shoot it in the chat. If not, I will just keep plugging along. All right, YouTube, please feel free to jump it in there. So if I get to the idea of encoding and a bit of morphology, again, I'm going to revisit ClassKick and Jamboard. Oh, don't forget, again, what I love to try to share with you is if you see I'm talking about a lot of the same tools a lot of the same time. That's because if you can find one or two subset of tools that you can rely on consistently, one, it's going to be easier for you as the educator. It's going to be easier for the student because they're not going to have to learn a whole lot of different tools, and you get more bang for your buck with where you feel comfortable. So here again is ClassKick. So I talked about it as, here's where I can have my students record their reading. Well, here I can also use it for spelling. So maybe it's a recognition activity. I can say, I will read these words. They have to circle which one is spelled correctly based on my pronunciation. or a simple basic spelling test where so many of us would have maybe different word lists for students. And it's hard to, again, manage that. This person has this word list. Maybe they have 10 words and the other person has 15. How to get that done easily in a small group instruction. You can simply, again, little back end work for the teacher, but get it recorded in ClassKick. The student can go on, have their headphones, and then write the word. This can be what I love also about ClassKick. It's device agnostic as well as many of the other ones. So the student can be on a laptop, on a Chromebook, on an iPad, whatever may be, it works the same. There is an iPad app, but it works in the browser as well. Same tools. They can't be adjusting any of my work. What also is beneficial for those slower processors with something like this, they can listen to the word more than once and nobody has to be waiting. So you're not losing a time for someone else who can't be patient when that is happening, or someone who really maybe needs to hear it 2 or 3 times to be accurate in their work. Additionally, this is beneficial because if you provide it, it can be provided, it does go asynchronously. So students are moving at their own pace. There is no teacher control of the pacing. So I had a couple of years ago, had a set of 3 boys, and I definitely had that Speedy Gonzalez who could get through several slides in the time period that I would want them to. And then I had that slower processor who needed to listen a little bit more, struggled a little bit with attention. So he might get through 7 of these words and somebody else might get through, say, 15, so to speak. And I can just say, okay, everybody stop, because and I'll show you in a minute, can see where they all are, but nobody else knows where anybody is at. So you can be monitoring and just stop students as makes sense for their skills and their learning. Because on the teacher, that's another one just for morphology. So again, getting into roots and prefixes, same idea, doing a spelling activity. Maybe I want them to write the definition so that I'm also building some reinforcement. They're just in one tool, or is it just, again, basic idea of circling? So this would be the teacher's end of things, more on the left. I design all the slides ahead of time. You can add in, I know this is people who are in the Google Slides environment. There's those add-ons that you can add slides later into students' work. ClassKick, as soon as you add a slide in, so if you had something and then added on to it the next couple of days in the same activity, it automatically adds it to the student work. So you don't need any particular add-ons as well. This, again, being the teacher side, this is grayed out because the students are not active. Another attention piece, it's active to being, those students' slides would be white, not gray, if they were actively on those slides. So that's also, I can tell when they're swiping off. And I can directly go on to, so if you see the slide on the right, this is one of the slides from the top middle, I can click directly on a student's slide. I can give feedback directly on there. So I could put a star, they have stickers. I started taking some Bitmojis and making them my stickers, which is rather entertaining, and give student feedback right on that slide as they're working. Or as you can see in the upper side of each of the screens, there's a green hand. The student can raise that hand, they can click on it. I would see it on my side and I can click on it. And it takes me, see what slide are they having difficulty on. And then as soon as I click it, it takes me right to their slide. It can also be like, hey, can you check this? Which is also great. So if someone wants me to check it, I'll say, raise your hand on that slide. When I'm ready, I'll get to it, keep going. So I know exactly what they wanted me to check. I don't have to remember. And they can keep going with whatever I want them to do. And you can go offline as well and see it clearly and maintain it as long as you keep the roster. The ClassKick does have a free version. You get about 20 lessons. We went paid, which gives unlimited. And if you're unlimited or if you're in the paid version, it does work with Google to create a portfolio. But we started with the basic for a while, though. Then our whole staff really got ingrained in using it cross-curricularly, which is this is one of the few things we actually definitively pay for as well.
Right.
And you can print them out. Yep.
I have a question. Sorry, it's Lisa. Sure. This is really an awesome, I love this resource, but how intensive is it in creating the slides for like vowel suffixes or one lesson or one thing you're
I would say
focusing
it took me no more time than when I created my own worksheets.
on? Oh, okay.
Um, And one of the key points that too, yeah, I mean, and yes, if you're, I mean, I'm just creating text boxes and things like that, where if I were creating my own worksheet when I was doing that, what I also like that you can do in here, that a lot of our teachers have done, if you rely, I'm a tech person, I still rely on many worksheets. You can scan worksheets and actually put them on here, and then they can use the pen tool or the text box to actually work on that same worksheet. So it can be kind of like a digital form of a worksheet, which was great for us, again, virtually. But even still, I'll take even just a screenshot of part of a worksheet that I like, and it can be one slide and incorporate different things.
Oh, this is great.
And it's also nice, once you have made it, you always have it. And you can duplicate it, you can share it to other people so that they can have a copy of it. So we have a lot of resources being shared between our teachers, which helps a little bit as well. And they're starting to have a small library of some of other activities, but most of our teachers are doing from scratch. And I will even say that last spring, I have clearly a few teachers not into using technology, totally get it. One of my very least tech savvy teachers, actually two of them, were really thrown into this because we had to have something to be using virtually. Definitely a bit hesitant. But now that we kind of did some legwork to try to help them, one, just scanning a worksheet if that's where you're comfortable. But to the idea now what they can create has been really transformative for me to see out of them. And I think for themselves and for those kids to do. You can also use this for handwriting, by the way, not that we're talking about writing, but you can practice handwriting in here. So if we think about writing skills, you can have cursive in here. You could have the teacher have a model with a highlighter, the student tracing it. You can bring in, I've brought in paper with the lines for students to practice. There's just so much you can do. Definitely worth, we don't pay for a lot of tools. This is one that we consistently do. Again, that idea of how for morphology, going back to one of the game-based things that you could have students individually be practicing, this again being quizzes, but you could do in Kahoot, you could do in a GimKit, that students could do some of that practice a little bit more multi-sensory, maybe independent, maybe even homework. That just is something, this might be something I would have created on a worksheet, but the kids are certainly more engaged when it's in this format. Again, just throwing that idea that you can have read aloud. And I will say one of my also favorite things about quizzes, and my students say so too, if they have these really funny memes on right or wrong. Now, if you're doing spelling, I don't often get into apps with this, particularly because it's not something I have students practice a lot individually in here. But if you really needed something else, particularly maybe more kids, this is the only subset of iOS apps that I have found that follow any sort of structured literacy component. These are Simplex spelling tool apps that you have to kind of keep going. There's a few dollar cost each one, so it's not necessarily cost effective. But if you do have, particularly I think if I had a bigger class when I was teaching in public school, this would be a great station. You can see that you could just have one device, non-COVID times, I guess, hand sanitizing, so all the things we have to think about now, but if students were touching the same device, you can have it set up individually. They would go in and click their name, but it does follow a pretty good scope and sequence if you needed. Yes, this is Simplex spelling, their apps. And again, there's a whole variety of them to kind of work through the series, but yes, Simplex spelling. So it's just an example of something that's out there that might be a beneficial tool that I think about. And as I mentioned, Jamboard, I forgot I thrown this in here. This is a new one we've been exploring. Jamboard is a free tool from Google. Anyone with Google would have it. It started out as this physical board. We actually have one, but this is just software. It works best if you're actually on a tablet device, but the integration in the web browsers has gotten better. And again, it's nice, it's free. It's limited in what it can do, which could be good or bad. But I love this activity, taking that idea of morphology. The sticky notes are draggable. You can't make too many objects that are moving around, but that's what I love about these sticky notes is you can make them, they have about the traditional 4 different color sticky notes, but that the student could, again, go through this. I could have multiple slides similar to a Classic or Google Slides, and I could actually duplicate this same one over and over again, and then make it that, each time they have to drag the stickies down to make the one that matches the prefix and suffix and root meaning as be. You could have a third color to, again, throw in those suffixes, however may be. So just another great tool that's out there, trying to explore a little bit more how this can be, particularly since it is a free tool. There's becoming a lot more resources out there. I just actually purchased a book. If any of you are familiar, if you're in the Google realm and in technology, there's a woman, Alice Keeler, who does a lot of things Google, just came out with a book more about this. So I'm starting to find more resources how this might be a more beneficial tool, but these sticky notes are really great for many things. All right, before I move on, oh, good, except Suze could move everything around and mess up my carefully crafted slides. Sarah, actually a key component, I don't know, oh yes, and Claire, I agree with you, ditch that textbook. Amazing resource. If you don't know, ditch that textbook. J. Matt Miller, amazing for many things. I use cross-curricularly, but Sarah, and if anybody else with the Jamboard, if you make one, we found out, and you happen to be working in a Google Classroom environment, you make one, if you share it in Google Classroom and have them make a copy for each student, it leaves yours alone and they can actually all be working on their own and individually. Google Slides, yes. Google Slides, you can definitely free certain things. You would have to put them as the master background. Totally agree. All great resources. Google Slides, it's amazing what people are starting to do with that as well. And that's where I'm kind of looking at what struggles in Google Slides that Jamboard solves. It's definitely not everything. But again, as Claire mentioned, ditch that textbook. Great book, great website. Matt Miller just does some great creative things, some great resources for writing. I think I have some here for comprehension as well. So, and keep putting those things in that chat. That's so helpful. We know fluency has become actually a bigger focus for us again in the last year. And it's one of those things that we know is so important. We know we need those repeated readings. We know it's important for comprehension. But really, how can you work on it in a small group environment? You know, it's great when I'm doing one-on-one with students for that. But again, if I'm wanting to do fluency drills, then I have to make sure I have my other students occupied, because who knows what can go wrong when it's unstructured or they're having to complete an individual task. So some of the things, again, here's a place where Class-Kick could come back in. Flipgrid, which is a video-based tool. There are those kind of packaged ideas. Fluency Tutor from TextHelp, really great, works in the Chrome environment. I can't use it because we are mainly an iPad-based school, does not work there, but I wish it did. A new one that just came to the scene in the last few months, I piloted a little bit with my class at the end of this year, is Flow Fluency, and I'll talk about it briefly. And then something you can use like Pages or Keynote, which is Apple's tools. If you happen to have those devices, they have the ability to record audio. A little bit about Flow Fluency. Actually, I think I put a slide in here, so we'll get to it then. So Class-Kick, same idea. You could put a whole long passage in here. It could be just sentences. I just gave my sentence example, but we do it with paragraphs and things. And again, the student can record the audio, and then you can go back and listen to it later. You can put in, a short passage if we're working with younger students. Class-Kick slides will expand out. So if you had a longer passage, it would easily fit on there. Just a nice, simple way that they could record audio. Then you would have to go back and do the running record yourself on that, but it's just a way to capture that audio. Here's kind of an example. This was out of Class-Kick. This was something I found in their resource section. So additionally, you could have them do a fluency drill of reading the paragraph and trying to, again, capitalize on having multiple things done at once as makes sense. Then you can have them go on to do some other reading comprehension activities that go along with it. And you can have them answer questions. Again, when students are doing in work on here as makes sense, they can write, they can type, or they can record themselves. I had a young lady who, again, this was my big tool because that she could record herself because her dyslexia was really impacting her ability to do handwriting and even typing skills. And dictation was off and on for her. So just the ability to record audio was just handy. I had a teacher of my lower school, she working with some younger kids, really built some really great interactivities. So she had that idea of this, short building on activity that the student would record themselves reading. And then she went on, and here's where I talk about, here was a worksheet she scanned in. And so she could put that in there. The recordings are her giving the directions to the student. Again, these were younger students, I think the second, third grade, so they could listen to her activities, and then they could complete each of these activities, again, working independently, working on their own, and she would go back and see that she had all this work to, again, show parents later or do her progress monitoring, and easy to keep track of, and the students could all be working at once.
Sharon, was that still Class Kick?
That was still, yes, this was still Class Kick. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So again, just showing it's one of our, why you can probably see why we rely on it so much. There's just so much you can do. When a couple of years ago, I had some middle schoolers, and we were trying something a little different way, and trying to, again, get them to capture their voice, and hearing it back themselves. That was kind of a key component we were realizing. You can do that in Class Kick, but I'd wanted to play with Flipgrid. Flipgrid's been around for quite a while. It was great when it was bought by Microsoft because it came free. And what we enabled us to do is we would go through our lesson. This Teresa and I were co-teaching. We would take the same reading, we would do all the activities we would do for a fluency, we would talk about the words, we would practice it. And every Friday for 3 Fridays, the students would go on and record themselves doing the passage. And then we had them go back and listen to it. And she had the Lego people, like, how do you think you did? And they would mark it for the day. We really noted as really forcing students to listen to their own reading for fluency, which was not an ever been a focus to me. Again, I had running records. I listened to them, I did all the markings, and the students were done. We found these middle schoolers in that same year. Actually, I had some lower school teachers doing the same thing, that students, when they could go back and really listen to their own fluency skills, made greater impact on the difference, because they were hearing for themselves and being forced to think for themselves. What do you hear yourself doing that you think you could do better at? And it was, I didn't think we would get this deep into the kids really thinking about this in metacognition strategies, but they really did. They would, I'm reading too fast, or I went too slow, or I messed up these words, or something, whatever it may be. And even so much, I had a 5th grade teacher, the students really started writing their own goals and tracking those goals. And even as young as 2nd graders, who, when they went back and listened to their own readings on these, made a better noted difference in their progress, because it was not us telling them what to do. This is, them hearing it. Yes, Lisa, Flipgrid. Flipgrid is so many things. Their library of resources is amazing. Actually, it's where I first started, I think, for this, finding their library of resources for things. At least, yeah, recording their remote writing. They can record themselves, which is amazing. But for kids monitoring fluency, and even so funny as I had this year, that same year, I had a young man, he did not want to see himself on camera. Totally get it. He just held the piece of paper up in front of the camera. Did not matter. I did not need to see his face. They enjoyed listening to each other because I allowed them to do that. But also having something recorded. When I had that this year, I had a young man, he I think we're in 7th grade at this point. He was identified as dyslexic in 3rd grade, but did not come to us until 7th grade due to the poor challenges you guys know moms can do. He was actually, this poor young man was also in Sandy Hook. He was in 3rd grade at the time. Amazing young man. But his mother had not heard him read since 3rd grade. And because I had the Flipgrid at parent teacher conferencing, I played back one of his readings to her, and brought tears to her eyes, because she said, I have not heard my child read in like 4 years. So having a recording cannot be just beneficial to us and the students, but just having parents who need to, have that reassurance that there's progress being made, and some things that we know kids won't do at home. Again, if you're in the Apple environment, there is a record audio feature in Pages and in Keynote. So if you had those tools and you were in that environment, free solution on recording audio, just putting a passage on there, have the students record and getting it back to you. Fluency Tutor from Text Help, really, again, if you're in the Google environment and need something more structured, there is a cost to it, but I think it's a really great tool. Oh, I love that, Sean. Students in the year and play at the end of the year. That's so great. It's amazing what they will hear about themselves and helping them see their own progress. I love that. Fluent Text Help has a great YouTube channel. So any of their tools that you may want to check out, definitely go check out their YouTube channel. Oops, I didn't put in Fluency. So the one let me go back to it. So I think because I couldn't find a great image, but I know I put it in my resources that you'll find I'll share in a minute. So this Flow Fluency is, again, new to the market. Their pricing is a little struggling for me right now because being a small school, it doesn't great. But I really have to say, when I tried it this year with 4 students, what happened was the students do a pre-assessment with you as the teacher. You listen to them read their passages, they have them, and then you place them. And then each time a student goes into practice, they do a preview of vocabulary, they do a prediction, and then they do a cold reading. The teacher has to go in and score the cold reading. So it keeps the auto, and it gives you a quick click on the different words and how to classify them: hesitancy, omission, substitution, whatever it may be. It gives them a score, and then it gives them a goal for what they should do. And I think it is a bit similar to Read Naturally. I haven't dealt with that as much. She's a little pricey if you're paying. Yes, it is a little pricey paying independently. And then the students have to do 3 practice reads, 3 echo reads, and then those are scored along the way. You don't do any of the scoring on that. And then at the end, they do a hot reading. Again, you need to go in and score that. So it will show them, where were they? What was their goal? How did the hot reading come out? And then there's comprehension questions at the end. So what I liked was just a lot of the repeated practice in it. Just hard that I'm not sure their cost structure right now, but they're very new. So maybe that will come along. I'd gotten it for a cheap introductory rate, but definitely just another tool that's out there that I think is neat. All right, moving on along. So the big part of reading, contextual reading, it has to be a thing, but we know fluency is a problem. We know the decoding is a problem. And so many students, their decoding ability may inhibit, may not be commensurate with their comprehension abilities for these kiddos we work with. And additionally, without a teacher to read text, either they have to read text that is below their comprehension level, that they really should be independent at comprehension wise. You can't be working on comprehension skills if they can't access text that meets that need. If they're only relying on their decodable text, that may not be giving them the avenue that they can work on these higher level skills. And there's so many more great options out there right now for that, just to kind of give you a few. So a couple of different ones that are easy to differentiate contextual reading. So many people know about Newsela, News ELA, depending on which camp you are in for that phrasing. I'll give a quick snippet if you haven't seen it, but it's nice is that you can go in, pick an article, pick the lexile level you want students to read at. And so someone can read something with maybe simpler sentence structure, simpler vocabulary, but get the same overall comprehension as someone that might be reading at a higher level. I used to not love them for the fact that you could not freeze what level students chose at. Students could move around. I love that they have changed that students can lock the level for students. And then there's 4 comprehension questions at the end for them to practice. A really great resource. I think that they used to have free. I think this year I discovered that it's all paid, but really a great resource. Freckle is another one that actually has something very similar. We use Freckle for math, happen to get the ELA component. So very similar to Newsela has it. They were the first ones that you would lock the level. So students can't adjust the level. You can align it to standards as well, not just articles. You can pick, say, hey, I want them to work on finding the main idea at the level for them, because it will do a pre-assessment as to what level is good for them. They do have a free component as well as a paid component. Twin Tribune is just a nice one from Smithsonian, does something so nice for older students that you might want to be working with. And then an oldie but goodie that's been around forever is Rewordify. I'll kind of get to that briefly. So if you haven't seen like a Newsela or Freckle, again, you can pick something, you're going to see the level, you see a little bit more sentence structure, longer, maybe a bit more complex vocabulary, but by the click of a button, it can be simplified to be shorter sentence structure, simpler vocabulary. So students who might need it at a simpler level of reading for decoding, or even some of the vocabulary, can still have the same conversation in class. This is something like, again, all regular educators should know about. One of these tools that is out there. Freckle has, again, they have it in an ELA side. They also have some adaptive articles in science and social studies. It's not a huge bank. It seems to be this has been their second part of what's coming on, but just something you could explore. We started with it for free. We ended up going paid later, just really we're relying on the math side, but just knowing that it's another option that is out there. Rewordify, I know I have, when I show you with you a YouTube link, I won't play this now, but Rewordify is out there, been forever. You can take a paragraph or passage from anywhere and bring it in, and based on their tools, it's not as scientific of a structure of how it differentiates, but kind of seeing on the right, you can different styles of how it will do. It will reword it so that you can only see the reworded words. You can click on it to see the harder words, vice versa, see them next to each other. They have also a whole bank, if you're working in high school or even middle school and high school, whole bank of literature already in here that's already been done with this, but you can bring in text anywhere. Again, it's amazing that this has remained free forever. Again, it's not as structured as Alexa level of adjusting, but you can have some of the settings in there, a bit more to it as well beyond that, but just another great free tool that's out there. Don't forget our favorites for accessible text. Learning Ally being a resource I know so many people use, subscription-based model. Many people love it because it's the human voice of reading, but again, high school to younger kids, whatever may be. One key thing, not all of their text. Clusive was released by Cast. I'm gonna have to look that up, Claire. Thank you. Actually, I'm going to Cast conference next week virtually, so hopefully that will come up in there. Have to check that out. Would love to know a little bit more what that is. One key thing, at Learning Ally, not all of their text has print to go along with their audio, so it's similar to like an Audible. This can be a key component when we're teaching decoding. And kids are listening to text, it has been proven that it's beneficial for them to see the text as they listen. But I also know there's because the human voice from Learning Ally to its partner or sister or cousin, Bookshare, which is free. So one great component is free, but it is digitized voice. So it may be depending on the tool you're using with the quality of voice that might be utilized, but it always has the auditory and visual text. It works in their own browser version. If you're in an iOS or an Android environment, I think Voice Dream Reader did come out Android, but you would need a third-party tool. I love, if for my kids who really rely on this, I use Voice Dream Reader, his quality of voices that are in there and the customizations. This developer, really great, really responsive to things going on. Really great tool. He has a great scanner tool that will also integrate. But for younger kids or people just getting started, the free Dolphin Easy Reader, because Voice Dream Reader does have a cost. Dolphin Easy Reader is free, but both of those work great with Bookshare. And so just an understanding that, that is another option out there that people may not be aware of, particularly if you need free access where Learning Ally does have a subscription. If you work in a school, you can also work out with them. They allow me to qualify all my students without having to submit paperwork. And then I can actually easily convert those to individual memberships for our students to take out. Oh, that's great. Thank you, Claire. If you're looking for accessibility, so many students, our devices have things built in. Microsoft, when they came into the accessibility realm a few years ago, have really skyrocketed with their learning tools. If you're in the Microsoft environment, Microsoft Mike has been this great resource. Follow him on Twitter. So much that they're doing and working with a whole variety of other tools as they come along. But they're a great variety of accessibility tools. Their immersive reader, which works in things like a Nearpod and a Pear Deck. Those things options are out there. I know Buncee they're working with Flipgrid. As you can see, just great tools for students to be familiar with. As I said, we work mainly in the iOS environment, partly because the built-in accessibility that, first of all, having students realize that Siri is that thing they can use to dictate, not just ask them to tell them a joke. But that speak selection is already built in. It can highlight the content. They're building up the quality of voices and just becomes a natural tool for our students to get used to using with the built-in accessibility. If you happen to be in the Chrome environment or laptop environment, another great tool is Read and Write for Chrome. It is free for educators. So if it's something you want to explore, use a school email address. You can get full access for free. For students, it is a subscription, but so many great tools. There's speech to text and text to speech, but picture dictionary. They're highlighters for pulling out content for reading comprehension. Once you collect the highlights, it can go out into a Google Doc. So if a student was doing a reading, collecting main ideas, they could pull that out into a Google Doc, take it into a writing assignment. Again, text helps, so they have a great YouTube channel on all of their tools. Counterpart to that would be Snap and Read from Don Johnston. This will, again, read aloud various websites and various things across the board. I love theirs for their over text help. Again, they both have such pros and cons, so I'm not sure which one I would do, but depending on what you need it for, they have this study tools that allows you to take notes right on a website. So you open it up, it appears on the side, and then students can do note taking. So just kind of a little different, some pros and cons to both tools. Again, both have a subscription and can work across various platforms. Quickly on that idea of listening to text and how that can be beneficial. So there is the protocols for accommodations and reading, which is actually a paper-based version of this assessment you can find on Don Johnston's website for free. It does require the teacher-student interaction. The student would read a silent passage, then have multiple choice questions. Again, the teacher would be doing the timing and the running record. And then you use a human voice, so like an audible version, and then a text reader with passages. The idea is to see, first of all, how does listening impact comprehension? Don Johnston took that idea. Again, they do have their free paper-based version with all the instructions on their website. Denise DaCosta and Linda Wilson were great creators of that. But Don Johnston took it to this digital version so that students doing it independently. This was a 7th grade student. You can see silent reading, not very strong in comprehension. But when I presented him with human audio, and I actually had a direct conversation with a student, and it showed him, I said, look, when you're listening to text, look how great your comprehension is. It was much more reinforcing for his self-confidence. Great discussion when he actually ended up transitioning out that you're going to need audiobooks. Also, I could pass this on to the schools and even our own teachers who were working in those content areas. He really needed text accessible. And even finding that, well, the text reader was not the best, clearly, compared to, but I could still rely on that as made sense. I have had it where text readers are the most beneficial. So just some great a tool that's out there that if you really are like, does listening to text benefit this student and having some data along with it. There is a cost to this. I know we pay about, I think, $750 per year, and I think that's based on the number of students. So some quick ideas on comprehension. Some of the tools out there that you may want to explore that can be some great things to help work with students who struggle with some of the areas of accessible text and comprehension. Actively Learn and Insert Learning, two very similar. We use Actively Learn because Insert Learning only works in the Chrome environment. So when I talk about Actively Learn as an example, you'll see some of the things Insert Learning does. However, when I talk about what Actively Learn does, Insert Learning will actually do it in a web browser as well for websites. Some of the things I'm going to show you, which makes it pretty cool. But again, you have to be fully in a Chrome environment for that to work. And Common Lit, actually, they're even throwing more things on there that I'll address in a minute. So Actively Learn, there is a free component and there is a paid component. The paid component gives you full access to all of their content. If you work within the free version, which I did for a bit, if you wanted to work, say, with a literature book, you could rent it for a couple of months based on a per student cost. So if it's a small number of students, when I did that, I think it was, a book, I had 5 students, it was $3 for 3 months for each student, was a cost at that point was fine. You can work with PDFs in here. You can upload 3 free a month. So every month you can just keep uploading as may be. So the benefit to something like an Actively Learn and or an Insert Learning, if I think about my students with, again, processing challenges, working memory challenges, whatever executive function challenges, but let's just say staying attention. If I assigned a literature chapter, they would read the chapter. They would probably forget what they read back at the beginning. And then I'm asking them 10 questions. They don't want to look back. They don't know where to look back. And they've probably forgotten what has been read. So within Actively Learn, and again, Insert Learning, same idea. Insert Learning can also do this in web pages. You can insert questions anywhere throughout the text. So I have the book, I can go through the chapter as I go along. I can insert a question. I can insert a note saying, hey, pause. We're going to talk about this tomorrow in class, or what do you think? And put down some information. Can be written questions, can be multiple choice questions. You can have them define a word. They can click on a word and look up the definition right within it. The text is accessible. It can be read to them. They can dictate their responses as well. And then within the grading system, it's all right there. I can see all my students work at once. And I designed specifically for my students, they knew what this scoring was. I created a rubric for them. So they knew they had to be in proficient advanced, and they had a rubric that explained to them that would have to be. You can allow revision so they can go back and fix things as well. I have it anonymous, but again, I would normally see it my student's name. You can sort by, question number or all the student, one student, how were they doing, just themselves. But again, this ability to embed questions throughout. If you're working with a PDF, it has to be at the end of that one page. So if you have 3-page document, it can't be within. It'll be at the bottom of page 1, bottom of page 2, but still decreases the amount of area that a student would have to refer back to. And depending on your student's skills, sometimes I make my students read, 5, 6, 7 paragraphs. Sometimes it's 3, just depending on their skill set. But a really great way to engage the students. And if you have, again, the paid version of school, we can share resources. If I've created some questions in a book, I can share it to my colleagues. But again, I started with a free version for quite a while, just renting resources that I need. They have also built in the ability to do that with video. If you're an Edpuzzle fan, which I am, where you can embed questions in video, Actively Learn has that and has a whole variety of other resources that are out there. Common Lit was something I knew I jumped into a little bit more this year. Common Lit, additionally, like the other two, has questions embedded throughout the text. However, they're already there. You can't edit them. So pros and cons, you have to work with what is there. It is free, so that's beneficial with all the others, with a whole variety of resources. And they just came out this past year with some assessments that really gave me, again, if you're thinking about the standards or different components of what you're working on with students for comprehension, where I could give the assessment and see what were the areas that I need to work on students' comprehension skills with, and try to sort some of the articles based on that. They actually also just released this summer, again, it's a remaining free, a whole curriculum that goes along with it. When I talk about the resources, I have a video in those resources that you could look at, really trying to be comprehensive, again, remaining free, which is amazing for the amount that is there. So just another great resource for out there. The text is, again, also accessible. You can turn on guided questions. So the students, again, will have to answer questions as they go through the text. And then you can have at the end multiple choice and or open response questions. And then the teacher can go in on the back end and just rate it themselves. Yes, Lisa, I'm very familiar with ReadWorks. I had that in here initially and tried to simplify, take it out. Love ReadWorks as well for all of their content. My teachers really love like the vocabulary in a minute. I think the short articles, so many great articles within their platform, particularly fiction and nonfiction as well, that you can dive into. If you're with younger students, if you are not friends with Epic, Epic has been my lower school teachers' favorite. It's great for independent reading. It's great for literature. It is accessible text. It's free for educators. The caveat being, if you're assigning it to work for a student, it is only available in the free version for them between like academic hours. I think it's like 8 to 4. So it's not something you can say, hey, go home on your own. Parents can sign up on their own to have other hours. But this has been a great, we have accelerated reader, independent reading, or again, a literature book for younger students. 8 to 3, oh, even worse, it shrank. You need to fight that. I'd like at least 8 to 5. But I will say for academic day work, my teachers really relying on our summer school students who were just turned on to it this summer, loving it. Just briefly, and then open up a few more questions as we move along. Just if you're thinking about students and way to demonstrate knowledge with this comprehension. So not only we need them to be able to decode it, we need them to comprehend it, and then we need them to show what they know. And so traditionally, and I had them read the book, I had them answer the 10 questions on the paper. But we know for our students, sometimes we need to be that in other ways. Again, Lisa sharing before how Flipgrid can be used. Flipgrid is a great tool for that. I think I even bring that in here. When I think about a reading comprehension companion guide, if you work with younger students, there is this app, I think it's now back available, it disappeared, Reading Comprehension Booster. Give an example in a second. I loved the idea, but it was for elementary students. I was teaching middle school. So I found the way to create my own companion guide for my students to interact with the text as we go. Again, made it in a digital format, so it was accessible for being able to dictate, type, whatever it may be. So this is quick examples of what Reading Comprehension Booster was like. Most of my teachers had this on their device. They projected it and then would talk about this as a group lesson in literature, filling in this information as they go. You could have it on individual devices as well. So it just created a format for what you might have students do traditionally, but again, they can use dictation, they could use imagery, they could use drawing, so a bit multi-sensory for our learners. I took that idea and tried to create something. I've kind of a couple iterations over time. This happened to be in Keynote because I needed the ability for one of my students to record her voice audio, not just dictation, but it could be done in slides, could be done in PowerPoint, could be done in Class Kick as well, and brought in a whole variety of different activities. I think I found this plot chart probably on Teachers Pay Teachers, but I built in literary terms, I built in plot elements and made a whole slideshow that I did have to make ahead of time, but then could get it to my students and we worked through it as we went through different lessons, bring in what famous person would be this character, what are those character traits, but they could do it in a digital format, all in one space to have a companion guide to go along with a literature text. I started making one for Hatchet this past year. Then I realized some student already read it, so I couldn't, but here's again, another way. Here again, I scanned in some worksheets or I just created some text boxes that you could have it all in one place. The students again could record, could type, could dictate as was needed. For youngers, again, this being Keynote, because the ability to record the audio on here. This was one of my lower school teachers. She did this with Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. She started with a couple of vocabulary activities. That's kind of can see at slide 7. Then she recorded herself reading the pages of the book and then recorded herself saying, you're going to answer this question. And then the students could choose again to write, because you can write here, type or dictate, or record their own voice for the answers. She did say, it was a lot of work up front. She had to scan all the pages and do all the recording. But because she had done it all up front, when the students were provided the copy, it was easy for them to engage. It was like a seamless time. So she said, yes, a lot of work up front, but it was great by the time when she went to use it in the lesson, she had thoughtfully built everything together. So the lesson went pretty smoothly along the way. And she could scan and put this in there because we did not publish it. So copyright things were not a concern. Again, going back to Flipgrid for reading comprehension, that was Keynote, because Keynote does have the ability for students to record their voice, which is not apparent in all. I think PowerPoint iOS version does as well. Back to Flipgrid, again, I talked about it for fluency, but there are so many ways to use this really cross-curricularly. Again, their library of ideas. You can have it apply, word analysis and phonics. Again, I talked about fluency. Compare and contrast details, explain things. So again, giving our students who struggle with print the ability to use their voice to show what they know versus traditional print activities may give them greater success and give us better understanding as educators what they truly do understand. Again, this was something I was happy a couple of years ago, I was doing a presentation, this happened to come across. I think this is a great idea. So I love this one. I keep it here to remind myself, students could do as a center, record responses. They built it with a QR code so the students could easily just go to it. They could listen to themselves. They can listen to each other. They could do a retelling, whatever it may be. I just think it was a great idea that I love to keep passing along, that this educator shared out about how Epic could be used for that. And again, it's free. So it was a lot, and I'll have to stick for questions. As I mentioned, a resource for ideas. This URL for YouTube is just a channel. When I find tools that I think might be beneficial, and I find someone, either a company or someone who has explained how to use it, I just curate this channel. Not my own. It's just other things just curated in one place. So if you have the specific tools that either you want to go learn more about or you forget about in a couple of days and want to go back and look, this is a great place to locate some how-tos, so many out there. I love also reaching out to companies for online demos. So many want to do that and get us educators, of course, probably to buy their product, but you might learn something from it. Also, many of these are on Facebook or Twitter to connect with. And if you happen to be on Twitter, and want to get into following some people, AT Chat a great hashtag, some great people in the field of all realms of working with assistive technology and education. They run a Twitter chat during the academic year, 8 to 9 on Wednesdays, but it's always an active Twitter chat for some of the great people that are colleagues of mine across the field to share information. And if you ever, I will take questions now, but if you ever think of something later, if you find a tool that you think is amazing, again, Claire, thank you for that one. I need to go look up Clusive. I'd love for, to connect with me on Twitter. Feel free to email. I love connecting with other educators because I think we can only all do that much better together.
Sharon, if you don't mind my sharing, first of all, this is awesome. I've been taking so many notes during this.
Actually,
there's also the AEM Cafe, AEM being accessible educational materials. They used to be AIM Cafe, AIM, another AEM. It's every first Thursday of the month from 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock our time. That's
I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great one as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's amazing some of the work that's come out of what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
This was amazing. Thank you, Sharon, so much.
Sure.
Any questions from anyone? Feel free to unmute. Feel free to type it in chat. Feel free to turn on your videos. And we can.
This was really great. Thank you. I guess I'm just wondering how much you use all of this when you are in person. Because when we were remote, I would have done every single one of these things. But I want to be careful in person not to do, too much screen time.
I totally get it. And that's funny. It's becoming more conversation in the past year because, we definitely, kids had more screen time because we had those teachers who were more paper-based. I will say though, we actually probably use it a lot of the time. I definitely probably say our younger elementary teachers probably do maybe somewhat less in class because there's still some of those tasks that, we need to work on pencil grips. We do work on cursive. I mean, these are things we still do. And you definitely need some paper-based tasks. However, we also found just for some of our classes, some of our teachers and some of our kids, they actually responded better when it was on here. So it's been kind of a give and take, but there is a lot of it across the board in our days. And again, some of the teachers that were not using it definitely have been using it more, probably still because of COVID concerns. We weren't sure, paper and pencils, but also just the interactive nature of some of it. We probably use it more than probably think we would do, but we have had concerns from parents about screen time. So it's a delicate balance.
Yeah. Okay, makes sense.
I know there's no easy answer there. I mean, again, if you listen to Marianne Wolf about, her whole perspective on digital listening and digital reading, but, and that's another key component, how much of it. I finally had a young lady this year, she was in 7th grade. She first conveyed to me that she thought she comprehended better on paper. So I shifted and would give her paper. She kept relying on the digital, strangely enough, even though we had that conversation. Then she realized she comprehended better because she could access the text and listening to it. So I think it's also helping these kids figure out as learners, some students can't handle it on devices because their attention. Again, some can't handle paper tasks. I mean, the highly dysgraphic kids we know, that's just not fair to some of them unless it's a specific task that they need to be doing in handwriting.
So Sharon, if you don't mind, another question that I get all the time from participants is, you just gave us, I lost count of how many tools you gave us. They're fabulous. I'm so excited to look at them. Where is the question I get often is, where do I start? Because a lot of these tools do have overlapping features. So how do you advise teachers to select the best tool for their needs?
Totally get it. I have had the same question many times as well. Particularly, I'd say I always kind of go from the perspective, I think as I shared, of my tech phobic teachers. I pick one tool that I feel like is going to give them the most bang for their buck for what they do and possibly have the smallest learning curve. I will say probably for us, that has been ClassKick because there was not a lot the kids could do to mess up the teacher work. Could be a simple, like I was, if I think of the SAMR model of technology, it was a complete substitution. You could take a worksheet, scan it in with our copier scans, they send it as a PDF, plop it right in as one. So that was probably the easiest one. Some people like Google Slides, and that's just where they want to be. So it's kind of there's no easy answer, but I would say the one that's simplest that will give them the most bang for their buck that you think they'll feel comfortable with. I mean, that's why I give you guys all of them, because some people I have talked to, like they write on Pear Deck, and because they live in Google Slides, they want some of the other controls and the interactive feature, that makes the most sense. I always tell people one tool though, start with one tool. Don't start with them all. Because, and I will tell you, I mean, this has taken me time to get there. Yeah. One tool is the best place to start. Whatever you think is going to be the best. And again, as I provide as coaching, what's going to be, or I know that person, that teacher, what are they teaching is going to be the best tool. I know it's not easy, but definitely don't go with multiple. And we even found that worse in COVID times when we were virtual. We had some teachers who might shift between tools during class, but virtually kids could not handle it, which kind of made us take an even step back. In the classroom, are we being unfair by having them switch tools?
Yeah. Good idea. Good point. Any other thoughts? Anybody thinking how they might use some of this in the classroom or in your work with kids?
Yeah, I'm thinking, I like the idea of when I'm pulling a small group, I'm always thinking, what are the other kids doing that's worth their time? And I like the idea that I'm really thinking of Class Kick, that I could create something where they're recording themselves and where I could actually check afterwards to see that they've done something, versus like, oh, manipulate these letters and I never really know what was happening.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I found the same again when I talked to the beginning about flashcard drills. I mean, those are so important, but if I'm multiple kids, you're trying to sort them for who got it right, who got it wrong, or I need the challenging words. And that became this pile nightmare.
Yes.
Where putting in something where they could either record themselves, or again, I can be controlling the speed and doing my own marking. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Necessity becomes the mother of invention sometimes. And but even if you're doing one-to-one, again, I will say one-to-ones, we use less of this. Although some people are still using it because they've created something beneficial. So it just has its place where it makes sense. I still use paper. My worst point was this year, I planned a paper lesson and my whole class ended up quarantined. So I had to revamp.
My goodness. All right, we're almost at the end of our time. So if we don't have any other questions, and Sharon, if you have anything you want
Again, love to
close
connect with you guys.
Yes.
Again, I know it was a lot. I try to, sometimes it's a balance. There was actually stuff that I don't think I even put in there, which may overload that idea. But, if you get into one and have questions, please do email me, or you reach out on Facebook. I'm always happy to help people through some of those other ones. I know some, back on our resources, there'll be some 20-minute videos I did a while ago on various topics on note-taking, things like that. But always happy to connect with other educators. So appreciate you guys taking your beautiful Saturday and jumping on.
Absolutely.
And look forward to learning with all of you guys.
Thank you.
so much.
Have a great day.